an after-school program and a summer program for children ages 5 to 12. Why send your children to the Margaret Fuller House? We offer a fun, family-friendly environment that supports your child's learning and growth.
Welcome back. This is Cambridge Inside Out. I'm Susana Segat.
And I'm Robert Winters.
And we are just going to geek out today. We're so happy about this. Robert got some numbers from the Election Commission, and right. He played with them.
I did. It's the geek in me was really quite a happy camper last night.
Excited. Tell us some gossip that's math related.
Math related? Well, I requested the ballot data. I received ballot data yesterday and was able to do some analysis of the results of the Cambridge election. Some things are pretty interesting. Some things are sort of things that I do routinely whenever I get the ballot data. So I thought maybe we would sort of touch upon a few of these ones.
Let's go.
So let's see. What do we want to do first?
All of it.
Okay. So I'll tell you what. I'll cue it up here, and then we'll sort of switch to the screen here.
What do you want?
One of the things that I routinely do is I run the ballot tabulation software just to determine, in the event of a vacancy on the city council, who would actually be the people who would replace the various city councilors.
So exciting.
So I did that. The interesting thing is I ran all the replacements for all the 9 elected councilors. That's actually, I can do that so fast, it's shocking. I did like all 9 of them in like about 5 minutes.
So you're taking all the mystery out of this. If anyone quits the council, we already know who's going to replace them.
But look, the president of the United States, listen, if President Obama says, I've decided to go fishing, we know who's going to replace him.
Okay, so there's a comfort in knowing who the replacement are.
We have vice presidents. Okay. The notion.
All right, let's go.
Okay, so cue it up.
Cue it up. What do you want me to cue up? You want me to show this?
Yeah.
Okay, here goes.
Okay. So what we're going to do here is just tell a little bit here. So given all the results away at once, right
okay.
here.
Walk us through it.
All right. So, assuming there's no change due to recounts and other stuff, there will be 9 new city councilors come January 6th, I guess, or whenever early January's inauguration day.
Okay.
And I don't think anybody would be too shocked by some of the results here. Let me first just quickly say that the way a replacement, if a city council seat were to be vacated, the way the vacancy is filled according to the Cambridge rules is that you take the quota of ballots that elected that individual councilor. And
the person who left.
Exactly. And just that quota of ballots, and no more, are used to determine the replacement. The logic here being that those ballots are probably representative, more than anything else, of the candidate who's exiting. So they would be probably the best barometer of who the more appropriate match would be for a comparable replacement.
That actually makes sense.
Yeah, it's a pretty good system, actually.
Okay.
So I don't think anybody would be particularly shocked that Dennis Benzan, should he leave, on pretty much the very first count, ends up after you. By the way it's conducted is through the series of runoffs in the same way that we do the elections, but not to elect 9, but just to elect 1.
Okay.
All right. So if Dennis Benzan were to prematurely exit, which we know he will not, but should he, no one would be surprised if Ken Reeves would then rejoin the city council as his replacement.
Okay.
Right. If Dennis Carlone were to, and again, it's very helpful to sort of think about who the voters are for these individual councilors, to sort of get an inkling about who those same people might also then choose to vote. So it was interesting in that if Dennis Carlone were to leave, even though he was part of this little mini slate, thing they call the clean slate, you might think, it would be one of the other members of the slate, but in fact it would be Minka van Buzicum, who right now was the last person defeated, would then rejoin the council as that replacement. The same thing with Leland Chung, who was the candidate who had so many surplus ballots. His replacement, though it was a relatively close call, would actually also be Minka.
That's very close. Look at that.
Right? And by the way, the numbers that are being displayed here are just for the last count, sort of the deciding round. So Leland's replacement would be Minka. Craig Kelly also not.
Can you ask for a recount?
Yeah, you could, but honestly, these things tend to be short term, so I don't think that would ever really happen.
Okay.
So for Craig Kelly, again, if you could almost intuitively know it would have to be either Minka or Sam Seidel, and turns out to be Minka, who bests Sam by a relatively, not a huge margin, comparably speaking. David Marr was interesting, and that was actually kind of close all the way through, went neck and neck, back and forth, back and forth. But in the end, it ends up as Ken Reeves being the person who would succeed David Marr.
Interesting.
Yeah, not unexpected. There's a little bit of a little paradox in the way we do elections that we sometimes call the McSweeney effect, which basically says that the person who's last counted out, which in this year was Minka, actually has a little marginal disadvantage in terms of fulfilling of vacancies. But that's a somewhat complicated story to tell that if anybody wants to hear, I can certainly tell about it. But David Marr would be replaced by Ken Reeves.
Yeah. If you want to hear about the McSweeney story, you have to call us and ask us.
That's right. We'll tell you all about it. Oh, it's on the line. It's Jimmy McSweeney. There we go. Now, Nadeem Mazen, who was, who sort of squeaked in ahead of Minka this time. Not surprisingly, if he were to leave office, once again, the third member of the so-called clean slate would not be the successor, but in fact, Minka would. Even though there was that little bit of a disadvantage for being the last person counted out, nonetheless, Minka would still be the replacement. I'll sort of jump ahead and then come back. If Denise Simmons were to exit, again, I don't think any shock there. Hands down, Ken Reeves would be the replacement. The only reason there are 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5 names listed is that in that account, the way it works is that at that point, Reeves had the majority of all continuing ballots, so he was declared elected. So it wasn't just one person over another; it was 1 over 4. If Tim Toomey were to leave, again, hands down, a little surprising, but and again, people in East Cambridge often only vote for East Cambridge people, so a lot of the votes don't really have a lot of live choices. So Ken Reeves would succeed Tim Toomey. The only exception to these, so there are, Minka would replace 4 city councilors, right? Carlone, Chung, Kelly, and Mazen. Ken Reeves would replace Benson, Marr, Simmons, and Toomey. And the only exception would be Mark McGovern. And in that case, it would be Sam Seidel, who would be the person who would succeed Mark McGovern when Mark McGovern takes a job in the White House.
I have a question for you. Who was in that clean slate? Who was it then?
That was Dennis Carlone, Nadeem Mazen, and Janaki House.
It's interesting because it looks like the voters of the clean slate are the ones who went for the women. Like Carlone are the 2 women, and Mazen are the 2 women.
Only because there was only one
Nowhere
woman
else
on the
is
slate. No, well, no, I think it's really just because there was
Because
some.
there were the 3 of them.
Yeah. Actually, let's go back on the air, and I'll say a couple of quick words about that.
Back on the air.
We're back. All right. One of the things that I also looked at last night, and I hope I have my little notes around here, was I just, because there was this thing about how effective is slate voting. And watch, I'm going to actually lose my, whoa, where did I put that
just make
information?
it up, Robert.
Oh, that's right, I'll just make it up. So I did a little query. There were the 17,743 valid ballots that were cast. The reasonable question in terms of the effectiveness of slates is how many, because people were putting out the word, there's a slate of 3, Carlone, Mazen, House.
Right.
How many voters citywide
Went with the slate.
put those 3 at the top of their ballot?
And
Well, what do you think? Out of 17,000 some odd ballots.
17%.
Nope, 273. That's it. Now, that's not necessarily the only measure of how effective it is, but in terms of if the message was you got to put these 3 in your top 3, that message was not received.
Do you know the names of those people? We can call them and ask them what they did.
No, the secret ballot. I dare say that we cannot. I can tell you what precincts they're in. We're going to cordon off those precincts, perhaps. Now you could also look and you'll see. It wouldn't be that surprising if somebody voted maybe a 1 and 2, but then they voted Minka number 3 or whatever, and they kind of broke it up. Just like in the days of the CCA, people wouldn't necessarily vote CCA 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. They may throw in an Al Vellucci or whatever somewhere in the mix too. So,
Well, if as a candidate you've targeted 1,000 number 1 votes, 273 out of 1,000 is not that small.
Well, I think it has to be understood in terms of being did it provide a little
Oh, no,
bit of
no,
a
in terms of
margin?
that, yes, you're right.
Yeah, I mean, in and of itself, it doesn't elect
Right.
anybody.
Right.
But the thing is that, if we're talking about, and again, in the end, we saw these extremely narrow margins of like 13 votes. So was that a factor in nudging them? Yeah, I think it probably was, but I think what could probably be said is that if you go out and you sort of say, vote these three candidates and throw out the incumbents, which was sort of what the message was being said, if that message falls on the ears of a David Marr supporter or a Tim Toomey supporter, or for that matter, a Ken Reeves supporter or a Denise Simmons
Yeah.
supporter, they don't even hear it. It's irrelevant.
Right.
I think the voters who probably were a little more receptive to that might, in a kind of a paradoxical and unfortunate way, might be the voters who are a little more inclined to vote a certain way anyway. So specifically, I'm thinking of a person who might have previously voted for Craig Kelly or Mika van Busekom,
I see.
right? Or one of the other newer candidates, somebody like Kristen von Hoffman or whatever. So now they're basically getting the message, no, don't vote for those folks. Vote for Carlone, Maz, and House, right?
Right.
So I think what happened there, and I think it's undeniably was a major factor in the fact that Minka lost, was the fact that the voters most vulnerable to, or most likely to hear that message of throw out the incumbents were essentially throwing out those incumbents.
Right.
Well, all right, so they threw out Minka. Craig Kelly actually took a bit of a dive in terms of his total numbers. But actually, I'm going to say something here. This is just a little off of what I was going to say, but I actually ran some numbers yesterday or a couple days ago, which I just found really fascinating. So I'm going to make a declaration who I think the biggest winner was in this election. Right? The biggest winner. I'm kind of looking to see if I'm scrambling to find a particular page, and I'm probably not going to find it here. But what I did was I was curious about, so we sort of follow who spent how much money on their campaigns. And here's the interesting thing. There were some candidates who spent as much as $100. If you translate how much money do you spend per number one votes, because number one votes is the main game,
Okay.
right? So how many dollars per number one votes, right? And honestly, it would be completely ridiculous to have calculated these prior to at least mid-November when the big bucks that were involved late in the campaign happened. So these are preliminary, they'll actually go up some. But there were some candidates, like Ken Reeves spent about almost $68 per number one vote, Jefferson Smith about $53 per vote. Craig Kelly spent a total budget in this campaign. Turns out of his $11,000 something he spent in the campaign, $9,000 of it was paying back old loans that he made to his campaign. So they were not actually spent on this year's campaign. The total amount of money he spent on his campaign this year was $2,750, coming up for a bargain basement price of $2.52 per number one vote.
Well, he's proud of that.
He is very proud of it, and he should be very proud of that. That is, so, all right, so you say, well, he was sort of close to the bottom, right? But he did win the election, and he did it by spending far, far less money than anybody, really. So, if I was wearing a hat, I would tip my cap right now to Craig Kelly for running the most cost-effective, efficient
$2,700. What did he spend it on?
a few brochures, I don't know, maybe put another inner tube in his bicycle tire. He really, really spent his money well, and he's got a lot to be proud of for that, right? And he also, another thing too about Craig is he got, and I'm not trying to sort of be partisan about this here, but he also managed to win without the backers of some of the people who had been sort of his strong supporters in past years, people who were now sort of jumping on board the clean slate and that sort of thing. So basically, he was able to win an election without the support of any of those people. So he's his own man. He owns the job now. He can do whatever he wants. He is accountable. He is not accountable to anybody he doesn't owe anybody anything. So as far as I'm concerned, he's like, he actually topped it this year. So anyway, so,
Thank you for that analysis.
right, you know, Leland
I
may have
like
got
that.
the most number one votes, but Craig actually deserves
How much
a
does
lot of
Leland
credit.
spend?
Leland, he spent, he spent like, well, money, it certainly keeps rising, like $36,000. But he also got a lot of number one votes. So his total, currently his tally for dollars per vote is about $15, which is actually relatively inexpensive. So, you know, he got good production for the money he spent, you know, definitely give him credit. You know, so he's actually in the more cost-effective campaign totals, actually. You know, but then again, if you get that many number one vote totals, it's bound to be cheaper per vote. All right. So anyway, that's a little bit worth noting here. There are a few other things that are maybe a little harder to. We're going to
We're looking at the
we're going to sort
computer
of try and queue up some of these things.
All right.
I can go in a lot of particular ways here. I thought maybe. All
What?
right. Well, we can really kind of get a little controversial here.
Oh my God. Okay, what are we
All
doing?
right, so we do have a recount on the horizon here. It's coming up on, you know, if all goes as
December
planned,
2nd.
starting Monday, December 2nd. So
I
one of the
learned
things,
that in the last half hour.
Oh, yeah. And you know, one of the things we certainly talked about at some great length in recent days, and the candidates have really been abuzz about it, it was the different ways of doing surplus transfer in the Cambridge elections. And you know, a lot of us have sort of talked up the possibility that, well, maybe in some future year we could actually switch to a fractional transfer method, which, you know, arguably, you know, first off, it would be independent of ballot order, so all this uncertainty would be gone. And you know, arguably, it actually gives sort of, if you were to run the election by shuffling the ballots 1,000 different ways, one might argue that in fact the fractional transfer probably is what the results would average out to.
Can we make it retroactive?
No.
Okay.
You cannot change the
Okay,
rules
so we're going in here?
after the game. So why don't you go down to where it says fractional transfer experiment here.
Ooh, okay.
So you click it up here. Hopefully it'll
Well,
come.
Yeah.
All right. And we're going to cue that up. And
All right, here goes.
So let me just sort of say, we'll say what it is that this is just using the actual ballot data for this year's election. You know, if there's a recount, then there might be some small changes to this, but we won't have new ballot data. So this is about as good as it gets. So if you basically run the election using exactly the same tabulation software and see, well, what would happen if we did fractional transfer this year? What do we get? Okay, so we have the same candidates. They haven't changed.
Okay.
So let's see. Let's sort of scroll through. You know, the usual routine.
All right,
with
here
these,
goes. This
all
is
right,
brand new,
all
breaking
right.
news.
All right, so you got to cue that up here,
Here goes.
okay? All right, so there be the candidates.
Yeah.
And now I think you got to kind of scroll up to the old one where it says like next page, or maybe there's some.
Oh, this isn't
fancy-
the list of winners.
No.
Oh, my
This
God.
is just all the candidates.
Oh,
So this
okay.
is what there is. So
So
now
first
we
round.
proceed to the first round. Now, one of the things that's certainly true is that you get the same results in the first round because it's just based on number one votes. They haven't changed. The
Right.
only thing that does change is what happens in subsequent rounds as you transfer. Now, as you go from the first round to the second round, Leland's votes will now transfer, but you have to see all those horrifying decimal expansions there because you're basically allocating them proportionally. So you know you whatever fraction of
Yeah,
them we're
as it
going
should
to go
be.
here. So but it's totally independent of ballot order. So you know there's a part of me wants to just round these off to nice whole numbers to make it look
There's
nicer.
no point to it till
But
the
this is
end.
what the software
Yeah.
puts out. So anyway, so it goes. So let's sort of continue through another round or two or three or whatever. So again, everything else sort of proceeds. So let's see, we're down over here to round 6. And let's just sort of scroll. Remember, it's the exciting, it's actually, I think you might need an extra round or so, but if we get up around the 16th.
Sorry. Oh.
Yeah, okay, well, that's all right, that's okay. All right, so if we go over here, let's see, we've got to scroll to the next one.
All right.
Yeah, right. So you can actually just hit next round as we do these. So we knock off James Lee. Let's get down to where we get to the real action is,
All
okay?
right. Oh.
All righty.
16?
Well, let's go just just keep hitting next round a couple
All
of
right.
times. So we go over here, all right? No, just a couple more. It's because it's not interesting yet. All right? So
Yeah.
now we defeat Luis
And we can't read
Vasquez. All right? Yeah.
Yep, there's Vasquez.
Okay, but let's go through a couple more. All right?
Okay.
So now by the way, this is an interesting round here where Mushtaq Mirza, of all his ballots, you know, where they went, the 300 some odd, about 1/3 of them go to Nadim Mazen, which is in itself kind of interesting. Now, anyway, let's sort of continue here. We go to round 12, right? Let's actually go ahead to maybe 2 more. right? So we're up here.
14?
Logan Leslie, all right. We're sort of down to about maybe 13 candidates, so let's go another one. More. All right. Jefferson Smith has been defeated. We're down to just Seidel, Reeves, Minka, Kelly. It's tightening. Sam is in last place, so we'll defeat Sam now. Right? Again, remember, this is really what would happen. There would be no dependence on ballot order whatsoever anymore. Still, Leland is the only one who's been elected at this point. Now, Ken Reeves is about 235 or so votes behind Minka, so then we defeat Ken. And I believe at this point here we get to our round. It's called okay. Oh no, actually we had to, because somebody was elected mid-round in the fractional transfer. You have to temporarily allow candidates to go over quota and then bring them back down to remove the ballot order independence. So what was the 16th round in the regular election is now going to be the 17th in order to see who the winners are. So we're going to kick it one more. But now that we actually defeat Ken Reeves, we'll see where people stand, or at least almost do. Right? Of course, at this point, Denise Simmons and Tim Toomey have gone over quota. So we have to go one more in order to bring those extra ballots back down to the other candidates. So I believe this is the one that determines things. So now if you look at this in a fractional transfer round, remember how close it was in the actual election? Again, this is using all the ballots from the official count. So at that point, Dennis Carlone was 13 votes ahead of Minka. Well, interestingly, when you do this using a fractional transfer, Mark McGovern is still going to be elected. He's well ahead of everybody, but it's Dennis Carlone at 1550. Craig Kelly is about 4 votes behind at 1546. 6 votes down to Nadeem Mazen, but now it's about a 35 vote gap between Nadeem and Minka.
Wow.
So I look at this and I think to myself that, well, maybe what this is basically suggesting is that if you sort of look on average what the expected outcome of this election is, that's probably a little bit more realistic. I might even go so far as to hypothesize that if there's a recount, that in fact the actual gap between candidates may actually grow a little bit, and that this is ultimately more or less the expected outcome, I think. So.
Do we see what happens after Denise goes out?
There's really nothing at this point. That's here. Right. Actually, do one more. Actually, do one more. You're right. Absolutely right. Because at this stage here, let's see. Nobody has. Oh wait, actually, you got to go one more. You're absolutely right. I actually misspoke a bit. So, so go right now. So we have everybody who's to be elected. Actually, this is the one I really was sort of driving at. Okay, so let me take back a little bit of what I just said earlier. So at this point, you see actually Dennis Carlone at 1554.
Right next to Craig Kelly.
Kelly at 1553. Wow. And then it's about a 9 vote drop off to Nadeem and about a 34 vote drop off to Minka. All right. So
that's interesting.
All right. So I think we can probably, go back to us now.
That's interesting.
All right.
There's a horse race between Dennis and Craig.
Definitely. Actually, why don't you go to the other page, just not for the TV just yet, but just so I can kind of see what else we got queued up in there. All right. Now let me just I hope this will display a PDF. We'll sort of show some of these things otherwise, but I think maybe why don't you just sort of queue up the distribution of number 2 votes by city council candidate and other rankings. Now you may have to. The problem is it may not be too visible, so we're going to try and make this at least visible here. Yeah, actually this is probably not going to work so well, so maybe I'll just sort of say it. All right, but one of the things that you can do when you actually look at the ballot data is you can actually also determine how the secondary preferences would have distributed, in terms of rankings. In other words, you could say that behind every Dennis Benzan number 1, where would the number 2 votes go, right? And what you find with Dennis Benzan is most of the highest recipient of number 2 votes behind him would be Denise Simmons, and again, that should come as a shock to no one. Right, just sort of picking a random candidate. How about Nadeem Mazen? If you grab Nadeem Mazen, who is candidate 9, and you look at who have the most number 2 votes behind him, and the answer is candidate 4, which is actually Janaki House. So there's a little bit of that slate.
I'm just gonna show it
working
even
right
though no
there.
one can read it.
Okay.
Oh,
Right?
see, that's what he's reading right
It's
now.
really kind of horrifying in here. Don't worry, I'll make it available to the rest of the world, shortly. But Leland Chung actually would have gotten almost as many number 2 votes behind Nadeem Mazen. Of course, Leland didn't need any of them because he was already long since elected, right? So you can do that kind of analysis just to sort of see more or less where things would go. One of the ones, the little bits of information that I did last night, and I'll just sort of say this just rather than trying to make it visible. This is really kind of a story of the importance of the number 1 vote. Because, again, let me just sort of focus on the Minka van Buzigum story. If you just looked at just number 1 votes, she came in 11th out of the 25 candidates, which is off the mark, and she was the last person defeated. But if you were to count, if you look at how many ballots ranked Minka either 1 or 2,
Okay.
do that for all 25 of the candidates, and rank the candidates based on whether they were listed either on the first or second choice.
Yep.
Right? In that, she actually comes in 7th. Right? So
What does
she's
that
sort of-
mean?
Well, what it means is that that's a measure of real popularity. It's just that she didn't get the number 1 votes. Right? If you were to say, well, how many ballots listed candidates either in the first, second, or third choice? She comes in 6th. And actually, we're actually sort of winding down here. So I'm just going to jump to the most interesting thing of all, which is that if you looked at the number of ballots that were who ranked her anywhere through 1st through 11th, she actually came in 3rd out of all the out of 25 candidates. So there was a lot of popularity, but just simply not enough number 1
ones.
votes. So anyway, on that note, and I have a lot more geekiness to go, but
But
unfortunately,
you have to call us and ask us
well,
because
unfortunately, that'll have to wait for
for
another
the
day.
next show.
All right. So
this is Inside
wait. Out.